Hey everyone, in this video we're going to talk about stick heights. Most of the groups that I've worked with, whether I've taught them or if I've marched in them, use a 3, 6, 9, 12, 15 height system. So we're going to go through each one of those and talk about the reference point for that height, and then we'll follow up and talk about technique-wise what we're doing at each height. I'll also just quickly say before we go through these that the 3, 6, 9, 12, 15 does refer to inches, but rarely do people or groups stick to a strict measured out height system. And so just keep that in mind as we go through them, and it'll make more sense as we talk about, for instance, 12 and 15. But so these are kind of the 3, 6, 9, 12, 15. They're just kind of reference points for the range that we're going to go through. So the first height we're going to go through is 3, our lowest height. If you can imagine putting your sticks flat to the drum, which they won't be perfectly flat or parallel because the rim and the drum head are not at the same level, but just pretend for the sake of this example that they're perfectly flat, parallel to each other. If you lift your sticks up about 3 inches and then leave your arms and your wrists where they are, but just turn them so your sticks are angled downward toward the drum, that's going to be our good set position, if we haven't talked about that in another video yet. But the advantage of this is if you have a good set position there, when you bring your stick back up to parallel with the drum, that's going to be your tap height. So that's a good visual reference point for 3 inches. And something, it's easy to overplay this one, and I like to say or think about it as don't break through that parallel. So as you're playing 3-inch taps, your stick should only go from down to parallel to the drum, back to down. Your stick should never be pointing up for taps. So our next height is 6, and that one could be an easy one to just imagine doubling your tap height. I would be careful with that. 6 is also, the lower heights are easy to overplay. So I've found that if you think of 6 as a big tap, it normally comes out a little bit closer to being right than if you think about doubling your tap height. If you think about doubling your tap height, typically I've seen people overplay it. But so set position, if we're going to go parallel for taps, you can kind of just think double that is going to be 6. So our next height would be 9, and this one I would think about playing this at 45 degrees. So if your stick were flat, and then the top height or the maximum height you would play would be the stick being just pointed straight up, just somewhere in the middle of that 45 degree mark, that's where I would visualize, that's where I would shoot for playing 9. So for 12, what comes next? We'll group 12 and 15 together, and we'll talk about 15 first because it's kind of the reference point for 12. So 15 is easy to visualize because that is just the stick is straight up. And 12 is going to be, if you can imagine, just having your sticks vertical, just straight up, just coming down about 3 inches. So these, both 12 and 15, these are going to be the furthest from the truth as far as if you measured out your 3, 6, 9, those may come a lot closer to the actual 3 inches, 6 inches, 9 inches. 12 is already, we've passed it, and 15 is just huge. It's more than 15 inches. So once again, 15, we're gonna just be vertical, and 12, we're gonna come down a little bit from that. So here's 15, and then here's 12. So at our first height range at 3, we wanna think about that primarily as being all from your wrist. You want to have as much, and with any of these heights, you want to have as much contact with the stick as you can at all times. You don't want to be squeezing on your stick. You want to be relaxed, but just touching it as much as you can. And once again, 3, primarily wrist. Something else that helps with taps is to think of it as, a good analogy would be knocking on a door. So if you can think about turning your wrist and just having the weight of your hand kind of dig into a door, if you were knocking on it, that translates really well from holding a stick like this to playing taps. That analogy does not transfer very well to traditional grip. So the best thing to think is if you can just simulate or try to emulate that same feeling, that same sensation of how staccato versus legato does it feel, how heavy does your hand feel, and just try to match the sound that this easy to understand analogy produces. Try to match that sound in your left hand as well. So next is 6, and 6 is going to be, think of it pretty much exactly like 3 in terms of that door knock example and also moving your wrist. You're just playing higher. So you're just turning your wrist back further, turning it further this way. Something to note here is when we play at 3, some people will say, based on principle, you should allow the stick to fully rebound to the top of your height range, regardless of how fast you're playing. That can be difficult sometimes at the tap height. Sometimes that ends up just because there's so much time in between and the stick isn't moving very far, it can be a little bit more comfortable to stop the stick and you end up having a little bit more of a staccato approach. Once you get higher and higher, it becomes easier as the stick is now covering more ground or it's moving further. It becomes easier to let the stick rebound up to the top of that height. So whereas 3 sometimes, just keep that in mind. Just be aware of whether or not you are stopping the stick or allowing it to rebound. Once you get, the higher you go, the easier it gets. So once you get to 6, it becomes a little bit easier to fully rebound all the way up to 6, which is what you should shoot for. So that's just an idea, something to keep in mind while you're playing through these. But once again, 6, just like 3, just like your taps, primarily from your wrist, that kind of heavy feeling door knock. Something else to keep in mind is if you are playing something that starts to get a little bit faster, I said at the beginning of this video we'd keep it at a kind of an even, calmer speed, but if you're starting to play faster, that would be a reason for you to switch from using kind of a 100% focus on your wrist to allowing you to open up your hand and use some of your front finger fulcrum. So if you're playing this speed, I would say 100% wrist. If you're playing that speed, try to use as much wrist as you can, but as soon as we start playing a little bit faster, it's okay to open up and use your front fulcrum or your finger fulcrum to help get some of that speed out. So next is 9, and once again, let's think about that just like 3 and 6. We want to approach that with as much wrist as possible, and speed will sometimes dictate. So for instance, I would try to think about that all as being from your wrist. And once again, if it gets a little bit faster though, this would be a speed where I would use only wrist, and this would be some wrist and some finger. Wrist and finger. So 3, 6, and 9 are all very similar. We want to think about that door knock idea, and we want to think about rebounding the stick, and we want to think about that primarily being from our wrist. Once we get to 12 and 15, at this comfortable speed, what we're going to do is we're going to add some of our arm fulcrum. So if you think about the kind of the middle of your forearm, and if you picture your elbow and your right hand looks like that, and your left hand, your elbow kind of goes left and right in toward you and then away from you. So we don't want to go crazy with that and have jelly arms and be way too much, but we are going to add a little bit of arm fulcrum if the speed allows it. The other thing we're going to do is still primarily think about turning our wrist, still doing that as much as we can, and also because we're playing a little bit bigger now, we're going to allow a little bit of breathing room, a little bit of a space cushion, whatever you want to call it, here in your hand. So don't think about using, at this speed especially, we're not going to use our front finger fulcrum, but we are going to allow this to open up just for a little bit of kind of forgiveness in this much larger stroke. So, and the equivalent of opening our fingers here, opening our hand here in our right hand, the equivalent of that in our traditional grip is just dropping these bottom two fingers a little bit. You want to drop them as little as you possibly can. The closer they can stay connected, the better off you're going to be. So just a quick visual between 12 and 15. I'll play them consecutively on the same hand. So here's 12 and 15. So quick recap of everything. 3 inches, we're gonna come from our downward set position up to parallel with the drum or flat. 6 inches, just think about a little bit bigger than that and you'll probably be close. If you think about doubling it, it's easy to overplay that 6. So once again, set position, 3 inches, 6, 9. We're gonna come up to about 45 degrees, give or take. And then let's go backwards from 12 to 15, or 15 to 12. 15 is gonna be vertical, as we call it, just straight up and down. And then 12 is gonna be down a little bit from that. For every height, primarily our wrist fulcrum. Right hand there, left hand there. If we start to play a little bit faster and we need to utilize our front fulcrum, our finger fulcrum, the smaller, faster one, we can do that, but still think about using your wrist as much as you can. And then 3, 6, and 9, all very similar. Once we jump to 12 and 15, like I said, we're gonna add a little bit of our arm fulcrum to those and allow a little bit of a space cushion there and here. So last thought on these heights and the techniques that accompany them. These are what I use, these are what I teach, but there's no one right answer. Every group does things a little bit differently. So these will take you pretty far, probably in most situations, but if you're doing something maybe slightly different at your high school, that's fine if it works for you guys. If you're gonna go to audition, let's say at a drumline that you really wanna be part of, and you take what you've learned at your high school or what I've just shown you here in this video, this will probably match pretty closely what most drumlines do, but the best thing to do is just to be flexible, to be able to adapt to what the group you want to be part of is doing. And best thing was just to download their packet. You'll need to learn their exercises anyways, and they surely will outline the way that they do heights and their dynamic range and how they define everything. So once again, just be mentally flexible, but this is what I use and teach, and it should take you pretty far in most situations. All right, let me know if there's anything in particular you guys would like me to go over. If you have any questions in general about drumline or auditioning or technique, feel free to shoot me an email. And if you want to hop over to the website, timwoodtheory.com, I'll have all these exercises organized into categories. So if you really just want to hit a double beat or rolls exercise, something like that, they will be in their separate sections. And I'll have PDFs to these soon. I'll upload them as quickly as I can. All right, hope that helps. Have fun, good luck. See you next time.